Yeah, I would like to give you the floor, Jyothi, as our first speaker for today at Global PropTech Online. We're going to talk about the trends to look out for in 2023. So welcome, everybody. Welcome, Jyothi. Great to have you with us again. And do you have a presentation with you for today?
Yes. Can I go ahead sharing?
Yes, for sure.
Well, thank you so much, Walter, and I would love to encourage everyone to please join Global PropTech Online to attend some very interesting talk. And today I will be talking on geospatial technology using sustainable development goals, and bit of it also will include the ESG. So before I start in, I would be focusing on what is geospatial, on what way are we facing the risk, and what is the final data implication. So to just broaden the vision of what is sustainable development goals, there are 17 sustainable development goals, and this is what's been identified by United Nations, and this usually talks about what is the hunger around the world, whether it's good health, it talks about the infrastructure, it talks about the sustainable cities, it talks about the below water life, how are people staying in biodiversity, what is the major climate change that we all are observing. I think you all should be aware about this sustainable development goal proposed by United Nations, how well it is being encouraged, and even more importantly, how are we actually considering this as part of construction smart technology. So to go ahead with sustainable development, I would like to focus on geospatial analytics. Why do I keep talking about geospatial? What is the importance, the knowledge that we all come up with? To highlight it, I would like to say that monetization process from the day it started with the data, it takes along the science and technology again with the help of the data. It is data-driven innovation. It talks about technology, it talks about science, it talks about the utility and the tool in the case of smart technology. Now, when I go ahead with the infrastructure from where I belong, I'm an architect with about 16 years of work experience in the industry, and I'm in academia working in Christ University. So when I talk about an academia wherein I talk about research, I talk about projects, I talk about how people are actually getting involved with construction technology, we need to know about the geospatial knowledge for sustainable development. How are the industries actually going ahead, and what is the socio-economic development? What are the action plans that's been identified? Now, if you all come ahead with remote sensing, I think remote sensing is one of the key major topic of geospatial analysis, whether it's about drone technology, whether it's about the energy source that we are getting from the illumination, or we're talking about radiation and the atmosphere. How are we actually trying to interact? What is the target, and what are we actually coming up with energies? It's important for all of us to understand how are we trying to interpret, how are we doing the analysis, how are we doing the application, and finally, what is the outcome of these kind of process. Now, to come ahead with the technology, I would tell you that biodiversity is the key criteria that we all need to consider as a sustainable development goal. Now, if you know or you understand how the sustainable development goal is growing, we need to understand what are the main technology that we need to actually focus on. Whether it talks about the oil and gas project is about within the 30 kilometers, how are we actually trying to protect? What is the main advantages or disadvantages that we like to consider? So these are the 5 major steps that we need to consider for geospatial analysis. First is the task of at what radiation are we collecting the data, at what is the explosion of the data, at what granular level are we identifying, and what is the non-spatial and the personal data. Next is the increased value of value-based situation. In what context are we trying to understand the data, whether it's historical or a temporal or a spatial context of data, what is the metadata, and finally, how do you come to derive a data from? So end of the day, what we talk about is data, everywhere is data, and the importance of identifying this data and going ahead and relating it, that's more important. Next comes in increasing data sharing. Now that your data is being generated, the important task for you all is to generate the data sharing. In what way are you actually generating the data in enterprises? What is the government level that is being observed? what is the key criteria, what is the higher returns on the economic growth. So it's a very important part for all of us to understand the economic growth in the explosion of the data usage, and finally organizing the data in different aspects. Then comes the reformulation. The reformulation talks about how are we using the existing economic model, what is the framework associated, and how are we trying to accelerate. Now, when we talk about the acceleration, then comes the data science into picture, whether we are talking about AI, we are talking about machine learning, or we are talking about the big data analysis for an industrial point of view. Now you just understand what was existing and how there is a change that's been observed. Now these are the few examples that's actually our Earth is facing. This is a major task for all of us to understand. We people are just evaporating, whether it's nature, whether it's people around us, whether it's the old Earth. Is it how it's sustainable? So the major part is this kind of data, are we actually conserving? So conservation of data is a major task. In what way are we growing, and what is the various kinds of edge computing, cloud system, and geospatial technology. Now, the next barriers for geospatial is whether we do not see any direct relevance of spatial intelligence. Are we able to understand the conceptual capacity for it to remain as a barrier? What is a sustainable model that is financially supporting this kind of technology, high quality data for the spatial intelligence? It is so difficult to understand this kind of spatial intelligence and what are the needs and the right tools that is being observed. What is the importance of these kind of biodiversity? I would say that biodiversity is a very important part for us to understand in overall life for the Earth, because climate is very importantly linked to the biodiversity, and it's about two sides of the coin, if you understand. It's also important of what is the important links connected to human health. What is the biodiversity that is being connected to about the action spaces, and what is the various kind of task oriented. So what is the importance, if I would like to say, the most important thing is in how are we actually understanding? So the world GDP, which is about $44 trillion, it's more highly and moderately dependent on nature. So this kind of biodiversity is being seen, and what is the risk or the businesses that we are actually trying to see. The next is the World Economic Forum, which continues to recognize its biodiversity. Are they trying to task the three top global risks in terms of impact, likelihood, and what is the next process? Increasing pressure on investors to disclose their biodiversity related to impact and dependencies. Then comes the biodiversity, which varies greatly around the world. What is a nature-related dependency? What is the source of risk involved? And what is the location-specific analysis? It's important for us to understand the location-specific analysis because each location varies. And we need to identify at what location it is available, how we're trying to mitigate it, and what is the risk involved in this kind of location analysis. Now, let's concentrate on this world database, wherein you see how the areas are being protected and where the land is, and how the marine system is having a terrestrial targets being observed. So these are the changes. You can see how protected we are and what is the changes that we need to observe. Then comes with regard to the world map, wherein you can identify the database about what is the maximum, what is the target, and what is the final conclusion that we are trying to observe. So the next important part is how is geospatial analysis being used as an extracreative sector in order to understand the immediate, close or general proximity and the environmental sensitivity to the site. So it's important for all of us to understand at what proximity the project is at a risk side, how do you understand the potential, and how do you inform the final decision. So these are few the growth that is seen from 2009 to 2022 in what way it's been aligned. Now next, let's go ahead with the data economy. Now, if you see the data economy with regard to the population that's been seen, it is about twice the size that's happened in 2018. And with regard to the the economy, we see it's about 2.8 times the economy of the original GDP. So there is not only the population increase, but also you see the economy which is also been increased. So this is a data that sourced from the fact sheet of the European data strategy on how we actually understand the European Commission and the slope of the data. So what are the approaches? I would come back to my latest of the ESG risk, that is the environment, sustainable, social governance risk. What are we actually identifying with this risk? What is the outset of perspective that's been observed? What are the research involved? Who are the R&D team that's involved in this kind of dynamics, and how are we trying to approach it? And finally, what is powered by this unique combination? It's an AI and machine learning, or it talks about the human intelligence. So if I would like you all to look at this was the flow chart that talks about the geospatial analytics, and it talks about how the geospatial analytics is being observed. Now, if you see with regard to geospatial analysis, we need to understand what is the main purpose, or what is the understanding effect of geospatial. Now, they are data-driven innovation system. There are a lot of sustainable social development seen, whether it is non-spatial data or the spatial data. Non-spatial data talks about the numerical data, attribute data, whereas the spatial data talks about the geographical location on the surface data. So this is the two kinds of data. Again, the non-spatial data talks about the demographics, it talks about the economy, it talks about the consumer panel, it talks about the psychographic, whereas the spatial data talks about the point of interest data, it talks about the satellite imagery, it talks about drone imagery, it talks about GIS data, it talks about positioning, whether it's an indoor data or it's an outdoor data. It talks about the DEM, that is a digital elevation model. It talks about the location, it talks about the interest of the data. So when we finished understanding the data sources, we need to understand how are we trying to model the data. Now, for the modeling the data, we use various algorithms connected with artificial intelligence and machine learning. Then it goes ahead with understanding the data processing. When we go ahead with data processing, we understand the data blending and integration process. It also talks about the business intelligence. It talks about the GIS or the spatial analytics. It talks about the immersive solution that's been observed. Now, when I talk about the immersive solution, I would highlight here with regard to the metaverse. Now, if you're all aware about the augmented reality, the virtual reality, that is the AR, VR, or it talks about the metaverse, it talks about how this kind of data processing helps us to interact and communicate with the monitor and see the various kind of representation. Then we go ahead with the integration of these kind of data. It can be BIM, it can be SCADA, it can be ERP. Now then this integration will take ahead to the data visualization of how the data is being visualized. It could be data-driven innovation, or it can be more related to a sustainable economic development. So these are the few things which talks about sustainability. It talks about data-driven innovation. It talks about sustainable development goal with the help of the geospatial analysis. So this is where my main focus of geospatial analysis with sustainable development goals go into hand in hand. So the next part, I would be talking about the value change. What is the value change that targets geospatial analytics? Now, surveying and mapping, it's a main part of the geospatial analytics. It talks about scanning tools and technology. It talks about ground radar, or it talks about electromagnetic locator. It talks about GNSS positioning. It talks about IoT sensors, or it talks about earth observation, remote sensing, drones, photogrammetry, etc. Now, when we go ahead with the surveying and mapping, the next process talks about data processing and analysis. Now, the data processing and analysis goes with the AI and ML, that is the data science part of it, and it goes with the GIS. Then go ahead with the workflow integration. The workflow integration talks about the building information modeling, that is a BIM. It talks about intelligence, it talks about SCADA, and it talks about COISR. All this is being related in so well nice sectors that it can be highlighted with regard to the telecom industry. It talks about urban planning from where I belong with an architecture background. It talks about disaster mitigation. It talks about infrastructure construction. It talks about natural resource management. It talks about the asset management. It talks about navigation. It talks about agriculture and application. So when we overall come up with this, what are we actually contributing? We are contributing to the society, we are contributing to the world economy, we are contributing to the social media, we are contributing to the entire geospatial industry. So that is where we come up from. So geospatial industry, geospatial trends can talk about demonetization, it can be talking about hybrid modeling, it can be talking about miniaturization, it talks about new space revolution, it talks about integrating GIS and BIM, it talks about mapping and various other kinds of analysis that we observe. So the next important part is about business model. How are we actually emerging the business model? What is the X services? What are the cooperation? What is a partnership? How are we subscribing it? And what is the consultation that we are trying to achieve? So I would like you all to look into this and spend little time on how are we actually coming up with smart cities, a digital twin analysis with the geospatial data infrastructure. Now, when I talk about geospatial infrastructure, I talk about IoT, I talk about drone, I talk about spatial imaginary, I talk about analysis of engineering, I talk about how the various kinds of asset management and engineering takes a major role. So it's like we create a data, we try to communicate with each other, then there's an aggregation of the data, then we analyze the data, then we go ahead with inciting, and finally the solution out of it. So it's like integrating engineering, non-spatial information and the operation information in order to get the engineering information and geospatial analytics. So the immense evaluation, the data flow, the 4D solution, the data information, and the AI and the ML algorithm. So what is the national mapping agencies? What is the geospatial agencies? What is the Earth Observation Agency? And what is the municipalities and government bodies that's been in crop? So it can be connected to hydrography data. It can be connected to mobility data, it can be connected to the healthcare, it can be connected to the green space, energy networks, it can be connected to many source of attributes. So this source is from Netherlands Geolocation Economic Report, wherein it talks about this kind of geospatial. So by the time I'm coming to the closer to my presentation, I would also try to highlight what is the various kinds of digital twin. I would say it's important for all of us to understand. It's important for anyone to understand the digital twin ecosystem. How is it correlated with the road infrastructure? How are we doing the water infrastructure, the subsurface or the rail infrastructure? Then we go ahead talking about the geospatial data infrastructure, whether it's an air technology, talks about AI, IoT, big data, it talks about geospatial analysis, that is more on mapping, spatial data, positioning infrastructure. It talks about advanced data analysis, that is GIS and AI technology. It talks about how efficient, how resilient, and how digitally enabled the data is. So it is very important for all of us to understand how is the socio-economic environment and business impact plays a major role in organization like national geospatial agencies. It talks about private geospatial industries. It talks about academia. It talks about research organization. It talks about data sources for utilities, transportation, buildings, campuses, democratic data. Data is everywhere. The data flow is everywhere. The way it's processed, what is the impact and what is the solution of this? So that's more important for all of us to discuss. Then what is the benefits that we all talk about? How is it benefiting to the society? For this, I would say that society could be benefited in various cases, whether it's transportation, it talks about better outcome for the public, it talks about high performing infrastructure, What is the benefit to the economy with regard to the national productivity? In what way it's efficiently measured? What is the enhanced information security? There is benefits with regard to both the businesses and also with regard to the how the efficiency it's been analyzed. What is the optimal delivery efficiency? What is the benefits to the environment? In what way are we benefit to the individual? So these are the few things that we need to highlight. So before I close on, I would like to precisely mention the location. I would like to highlight the industrial workflow. I would like to highlight the architecture. I would like to highlight the healthcare and the meter, metric, and the system behind it. So geospatial technology, the geospatial trend, the technology drivers, the business processes, application, and the value impact. So these are the few things that's been highlighted. What is the geospatial analysis that's been observed? What is the tactics of understanding for each and every part of the design? What is the importance of the various data that is driven with the help of technology? What is the Earth observation that's been identified? What is the analytical data, the BIM, the GIS, the data science, and what is the application, whether we talk about transportation, whether we talk about construction, whether we talk about agriculture, we talk about government, manufacturing, fisheries, and they are the value impact that's been seen in US dollars. So with this, I would say that this is how we want to go ahead with geospatial technology. And this is what it's all talking about, the sustainable development goals, because it's important for all of us to understand, are we actually trying to correlate with what is present? Are we understanding the impact of the ESG? Are we really going to develop? So this is the more important question that we all need to ask ourselves, and how are we trying to address these kind of hitting questions that's around us. So with this, I'm open to questions, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you see that we ask the questions that you just asked? Do we see that that people around the world are all working on these questions or having these questions on their mind?
I would say that predominantly not all of them are working on it, but at least there is an awareness created. Because of this kind of ESG sustainability, what are the trends that we are going ahead in future? At least there's an awareness, and people are thinking, they are making mandate in their business. You know, people are thinking about how are we trying to do the CSG, the sustainable drive, how are we trying to give that quantum of finance involved in that activities. So all that thinking is started. Definitely there should be a predominant growth seen in that, but how are we trying to take to the next level? That's important.
Yeah, and how do you see the differences between, because everybody is talking now about the ESGs, but you have also like the SDGs. How do you see those two coming together?
I would say that sustainable development goal was already defined by United Nations quite time earlier. So these are the history that is being signified. But the next thing, what ESG that you have taken it forward in the platform, it's a very key important role, which is part of the goals. So I would say the SGD is a framework, and ESG is a part of sustainable goals.
Yeah. Okay. So that's just the beginning point, the ESGs.
Yes, and we need to massively start working on that.
Yeah, cool. Well, thank you very much for being with us today again, and I hope to see you soon, of course, next year during all of our events. So speak to you soon.
See you. Thank you so much. Wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Yes, why not? You too, the same. Let's do that. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.